Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Welcome everyone. My name is Astha and I am Program Manager for Defense and Foreign Affairs. We will be talking about power protocol in public good and who controls the future of tech. So every time you use a navigation app, run a website or build with AI, you're using tools shaped by choices but about access and openness. This episode explores how open source thinking, sharing code, ideas, and infrastructure can unlock faster, more inclusive innovation, and why the future of technology might depend on keeping it open. Our guest today is Rahul Poruri, CEO of FOSS United, and a rare voice at the intersection of technology, ethics, and civic responsibility. Rahul has spent years asking the questions that matter. How do we build systems that are not only efficient but just? In this conversation, we will talk about tech policy in India, the myth of neutrality in software, and why openness, auditability, and imagination should be at the heart of future ready digital society. Welcome, Rahul. Thank you for joining me in here. So, I'll start with the first question. Let's deep dive in. You have worked at the intersection of software, science, and public interest. What was that one moment that made you realize that open ecosystems actually accelerate innovation? And it may not just be tech, but in all the other aspects that you can think of.
Thanks, Asta. Great to be here back at Takshashila. I think there have been a few key moments in my life where it became abundantly clear to me that open systems were significantly driving innovation forward and innovative work forward. So my background is in physics. I haven't been in the software ecosystem like my entire life. And when I was doing physics, I was particularly interested in astronomy. And one of the things that was very common and was astronomy was one of the pioneering fields for this is something called a preprint server. Mm-hmm. So in academia, it is fairly common to say that, hey, look, I'm going to publish my paper in a journal and you might be able to read it for free, or you might have to pay money to be able to access that journal.
Right.
And when I started getting interested and started looking into astronomy, I was astonished about the fact that there were a lot of people who were putting up what are called preprints on this free-to-read website called Archive.
Okay.
ARXIV. And it's a preprint server because these were papers which were drafts, or these had been submitted to journals, but they hadn't been fully reviewed and published yet, and so on and so forth.
Right.
But the fundamental thing is these papers might end up in journals where you could read them freely, or they might end up in journals where you'd have to pay to read them. But at the very least, this preprint, this thing which hasn't been published yet, is available for free to read on this preprint server, right? And that became popular enough that there have been the preprint server Archive itself has grown to also have math domains, to have computer science papers, and there's also other domain-specific preprint servers. I think there's a bioarchive, which is very specifically on biology research specific preprint servers, right?
Right.
And they were our go-to place to be able to think about, okay, what new work is happening, what new things are people working on, what new data are they using, what new algorithms are they applying to be able to understand astronomy data, or even any scientific data for that matter, right? Even now, for example, Sci-Hub is still a very influential resource when it comes to fundamental research or even applied research.
Right.
And there again, we won't be able to make much progress in terms of fundamental research if we aren't able to build on the shoulders of these giants, as what Newton said, right? So even in college, it was fairly abundant to me. And then later on, when I started my career in scientific software, I got to see sort of the other side of it in terms of we were building solutions for all of these companies which needed scientific software, like some of them Fortune 500 companies, R&D labs in these companies, etc., etc. And practically all of the things that we were building for them were built on top of open source software.
Right.
90, if not 95% of the total number of lines of code in the solution that we were building had already been written by somebody and published as an open source package. And we were only writing that like 10% or 5% of new lines to be able to bring all of these packages together and then do what specifically the customer like needs, right? Like what problem they need to solve. So there again, like I got to see how this isn't just fundamental research or even applied research, but rather day-to-day problems, things which are affecting corporations and like millions, if not billions of people, how the solutions that we were building for them were also built on top of open source software.
Right.
And there again, it was very evident that we were only able to build some of these solutions as quickly within a certain budget because we were able to rely on these open source packages that had been put out 5, 10, 15, 20 years before we came to solve this specific problem.
So I have a lot of questions here to unpack here. One is, it's great to have open sources because it helps you build over an already existing knowledge. One is, the question as a layman person, I think, is what is the credibility of these open sources? Like, how do you verify that the source that you have got is something that you can build on and something that will actually work for you as well? That's one question. I'll get to second question once you answer this.
Perfect, Asta. That's a very good question. How do you know the credibility of an open source project? Right?
Yes.
Like, is it credible or not? How can I trust them? Because if you're going to build something on top of the software that somebody else has written, how do you trust that that software isn't going to break, right? And therefore, like your software is going to break.
Yeah.
I think I'll answer your question with another question, but also like give the meaningful answer. Like, for example, when we are trying to build a business, we almost always inevitably rely on other businesses to be able to do things for us. If I'm setting up a business, I have to figure out how to handle money. So I rely on a chartered accountant. I have to do a bunch of maybe GST registration. So I rely on some people for that. I have to build a website. So I have to go to some agency to be able to do those things. Maybe I have to hire and I have to rely on a hiring agency for it, etc., etc. Fundamentally, I think trust is something that we are able to perceive from the network that we are in. Like usually in a lot of these cases, we ask around the network that we are in and ask them, hey, look, this is the problem that I have. Why don't you give me a recommendation of something that maybe you've used in the past? Yeah. And that also holds true for a lot of open source projects because a lot of these networks are digital. Like we end up relying on, like we have been able to build these online communities which are able to give trusted advice on, hey, look, if you're trying to solve that problem, why don't you use this package?
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And it's also a good reinforcing mechanism as well, because the online communities will also tell you bad things about certain open source packages.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Will tell you what is missing in those open source packages. So a lot of the times you'll often find somebody online giving you meaningful advice on a certain thing. And you don't even also have to rely on like individuals, but rather just the like wisdom of the crowds, right? To some extent. Because if a large enough number of people are using and relying on a certain open source software, and they have been for a significant amount of time, that's a decent enough indicator that that software is good.
Right.
It's the same thing with businesses also, right? Like a business has lived long enough, has like large enough clients. You can trust them reasonably that, okay, they must be doing something right. They must be providing some meaningful services. Otherwise, they wouldn't have lasted this long.
Right.
And that also, interestingly, is what happens with open source projects that don't really solve a problem well, or that aren't solving a problem in the right way in some sense, right? Because those packages will end up getting overshadowed by newer packages which somebody else will create, which are actually solving the real underlying problem, solving it better, solving it more efficiently, etc., etc. So yeah, in terms of like how do you trust these things? Like rely on the wisdom of the crowds. And there's a whole bunch of other things also. The open source projects themselves, for example, might advertise, hey, look, here are other organizations which are using our software. Right. Here are other people, other individuals who are willing to vouch for how good our software is because they are like using it on a day-to-day basis. Not all open source projects are able to do this because not all of them are able to sort of figure out who is even using their software. But there's a lot of people nowadays especially, who are trying to figure out who are our users. Let's actually talk to these people. Let's get them to give us testimonials, which we are then able to use to be able to build a trust about the thing that we're building.
Sure. So the second question that I was thinking here is that any innovation, at least I've understood in different sectors, and tech is fairly new sector that I'm exploring. So any innovation, research, advancement that happens needs money. And all these are market forces that come together and fund a project, and that's when they take a direction and they move in this direction. So when we talk of open sources, or we talk about this access, like even in medicines there's generic, so how do we think of pricing it, or how long do we keep it patented to be not used by somebody else? Or like, just help me understand in terms of tech and innovation, how does this model work out here?
So how does the open source model work in terms of financial investment? Is that like
yes
Okay.
Yes, because if it's open source, who is funding these projects, and who are these people who are so driven to solve a problem that they will all come together and solve a problem? They need to have incentive too. Mostly in our lives we seek gratification through monetary incentives. So how does that work out when we are talking about open sources? So someone who is building an open source to solve a problem, what's the incentive of that person or a community that comes together to solve the problem?
Awesome. Again, a great question, and like my answer to this question has like evolved significantly over time. And the latest answer I can give you is, I think a lot more people care about the commons just because they are using a shared commons, and they're not necessarily only motivated by money. So what I mean by this is, tribal people have existed for a very, very long time. My wife comes from a tribe in Himachal, and like, as I get to know about some of their tribal traditions, and also not just them, but in general tribal traditions from across the world, right? There's been a long history of them worrying about the commons that they are residing in, and what all common resources that they have a shared access to, and they are all sharing. And how do they ensure that they're preserving the commons, not because there's some financial incentive in sharing, ensure the commons is maintained, but just because the commons is a shared resource and it should be maintained, and we should ensure that we are contributing some amount of our time or energy to continue maintaining this commons and ensure that the commons is healthy. I feel a certain sense of a similar tribal feeling when it comes to digital commons as well. Digital commons, whether that is open source software or open data or Wikimedia or Wikipedia like systems, where people are coming together to be able to build a commons and maintain it. I do feel a certain sense of the same very fundamental, maybe a part of human nature of, hey, I want to participate in a commons with other humans, and I want to work on maintaining that commons with like other like humans. For me, that is one of the bedrocks on which I have been building my mental models. But at the same time, there's also a significant financial this thing also. So the way that I'm able to delineate these two things is, there are commons which are community centric, and there are commons which are specific to for-profit organizations or organizations specifically. Like, an individual might not care about those commons resources, digital commons resources, but an organization is like very much going to. So for example, there are a lot of open source packages which talk about customer management, or it's a CRM, or it's a help desk, or that sort of a thing. An individual doesn't have any need for a help desk or like customer relationship management. So there, right, like there, when we are thinking about what is the financial model or incentive of creating digital commons which are organization specific, at least in my opinion, the right mental model is, there are very few companies which succeed or fail because of a customer relationship model software. Right. Like, there are very few companies which fail because they have the wrong help desk software. Like, they have, like, maybe the product is wrong, maybe the product market fit is wrong, maybe their like fundamental thinking about their users is wrong. They're not failing because they are using the wrong help desk software. So fundamentally, the software that comprises most of what a company relies on is not their business moat. right? Like this is also the reason why, like for example, Takshashila doesn't like build its own video conferencing software, like build its own operating system, right? This is not the moat of Takshashila, which is why Takshashila has decided that, you know what, I will like get all of this non-essential things, or even if they are essential, like it's not the best thing for me to spend my resources recreating a new operating system and building my own hardware. I'm just going to procure it from other people.
Okay.
Right. And even better than procuring from other people, because it's still like you're still exchanging it and somebody else is now like getting paid to own these things.
Yes.
Why not other companies, all of which have a need for a help desk software? Maybe you chip in 1 rupee. Now there are hundreds, if not thousands of similar organizations. And all of you are able to put together that money to be able to build a common software for you together,
so,
right?
Like a sustainable system of how you pull in money and you bring innovation, because you all share that common problem.
Yes.
And it needs to be solved.
Yes.
Not just problem, maybe just day-to-day life transactions.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly, right?
Okay.
So, for example, one of our industry partners, funders, and co-founders has this ERP system called ERP Next. It's free and open source. So if anybody wanted to use it, you could just like install it by yourself, not pay anybody money, and like you just have an ERP system for yourself that you set up, right? And again, like ERPs are one of those things which practically all companies rely on. But the fact that all of the companies haven't come together to decide, you know what, I don't want to pay some vendor and I don't want to build everything by myself. Let me just give money to somebody to maintain this as a commons resource.
Right.
And like similarly, there are hundreds, if not thousands of pieces of software which are org specific, which an organization needs to be able to function meaningfully and participate in like a market economy. Those are not the moats of those company. And that is where open source like comes in. And that's also where the participants now need to recognize the fact that, hey, yeah, it's in my best interests to pay somebody to build this open source software. And it's in our best interest as an industry to be able to build these things together. So, for example, one of the best examples I can give you is there is this alliance, part of the Linux Foundation, called Finos. It's a number of financial institutions. All of them have come together to build open source software for financial institutions.
Okay.
Right? Because again, like those software isn't your moat. That is not where your business acumen is, or that's not where you're differentiating yourself from other players in the financial ecosystem. So why wouldn't you want to work together with other players in the ecosystem, pool money together and build out these common platforms together? And they've successfully done this. They've successfully built out a number of different open source tools. They've come together to talk about guidelines on what open source software is useful for us, what can we use, what should we use, how should we think about adopting them within our own company, how should we change our organization software usage guidelines so that we are more open to using open source software, etc., etc.
So now when I hear you talk, I have so many questions right now. So one is, when I think of open source, I'm not sure if the privacy of my data would be maintained. That's one thing that comes to my mind first. While the selling point of all these closed door softwares is that your privacy will be intact, your data will not be shared. So how true or false is this?
Okay. So it's neither true nor false, because I'll make the clarification. So open source software by itself has no comment on your privacy. So just to clarify the definition, right? So we're talking about free and open source software. With free and open source software, you have been given the software and you have been given a certain rights over the software. You can use the software, you can share the software with others, you can modify the software and share like your modifications with other people, and you can also study the software. Right? So there's no question here about like, is my data private, is like, are my concerns being addressed? Because we are only talking about the source code over here.
Right.
The privacy aspect comes in when you're working with organizations which created an open source software but are also providing it to you as a software as a service.
As a solution.
Right? So if you wanted to, if it's a true open source project, if it's a true FOSS project, You can just take it. You don't have to rely on their solution, their services, but you could just be using it yourself internally.
Okay.
Without relying on them at all. So now there's no question of privacy whatsoever because your data is never leaving your org digital boundaries.
All right.
Right? And if you're still choosing to rely on a service provider, like on their solution, then you're just within the standard policies of like you're trusting one company which has closed source software that they're staying true to their privacy policy is the same rules that apply to another company. Like at that point, it doesn't matter whether the software is open source or not. You're purely ruled by this is the privacy policy when you're using our software. This is the like terms and conditions when you're using it, etc., etc. So there is just standard business practices. That
so like a layer built on this of privacy to like protect your data or not to like. No, if I'm understanding it correctly.
No. So that's what I'm saying, right? So open source itself does not say anything about your data is going to be private or like or anything of that sort.
So how will it be governed? Like what I'm trying to get at is if tomorrow government comes up with a data protection digital act is what we are anticipating will come probably in a year or two. It's already in draft form. So how will it be applied on open sources differently and on the paid subscription of the software's usage?
It doesn't apply to open source software like as a software.
Okay.
In the sense that like, so the ERP system again, right? Like let's continue that analogy. So if the ERP software is open source, you could take that software and you could run it yourself internally to Takshashila.
Right.
So now there is no question of privacy in the sense of, how is somebody else going to respect my privacy when they collect my data? Because your data isn't leaving
your
the
system.
digital boundaries.
Okay,
right? Your system.
It stays within
the system.
Okay, understood.
And now when we're talking about, somebody else is giving me an ERP solution, it doesn't matter whether it's an open source solution or not an open source solution. There it's purely a business transaction where there are like the standard governing rules, right? Like, what is the privacy policy that you have and so on and so forth.
Understood.
So open source, the software itself has no direct implications on privacy. It's the businesses that are either using open source solutions or like providing open source solutions as a service. That is where the privacy implication comes in.
Okay.
And to talk about that also, right? So with a closed source solution that you're using, you are never 100% sure what all data they are collecting. They could tell you that this is all the things that we collect, but how do you validate independently or as yourself? But if it is a solution which is an open source, which is built on top of an open source software, then I can actually go look at the open source software myself.
And see what is being
collected.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So, or even if I am not technically capable of understanding it, there are people who can independently validate, look at the code and understand, hey, is this like what all are they collecting? They're saying that they're collecting these things on the website in their usage policy. Is that true? And is that actually what they're collecting by looking at the code?
Understood.
Right?
Understood.
Are they making any changes to the software that I'm using through them as a service? Or is the software that I'm using through them as a service exactly the same as the software that they've published? Right? So that sort of independent verifiability and accountability is built in and you get it for like free when the source code is open, right? When the source code is available.
Right.
And with closed source software, you're not able to do it. We are never able to independently verify, and we are best case scenario reliant on some other third party who's able to go and look at the source code of this company and give an audit of, we have audited their code, everything is up to the mark.
So which takes me to this question of, we were just like before this, we were talking about innovation without borders. How does that work out, and what would be then each country's government role in this kind of thing? Because there must be something like, we spoke about Zoom, we spoke about WebEx. So how do we bring those things in context of this?
Perfect. So I'll give the other example now. So the other co-founder of FOSS United and an industry partner is Zerodha. And Zerodha has been very vocal in saying that their technological success is fully reliant on software that has been built globally.
Okay.
and continues to be built out globally, right? So for example, and again, they've publicly talked about this, there are different kinds of databases like Redis or Valkey, Postgres. There are languages like Python and JavaScript or Go. There are different kinds of frameworks to build like front-end and back-end applications, mobile applications, etc., etc., etc. Even operating systems which they're running their servers on, right? These are all international projects where people from around the world have come together to be able to build those digital commons and those open source software. And Zerodha shouldn't, again, as a business entity, have to create their own operating system, create their own programming language, create their own thing that they can use to build applications, etc., etc. Zerodha is in the financial markets. They want to be able to provide the best offering to people who want to trade in the markets. Right. And everything else is sort of a technical detail in terms of how it is being built out. And they again were able to look at the technical landscape globally, pick the absolute best tools that were available to solve the problem, and they built out a solution on top of all of these things. Right? Writing like code on top of all of them to be able to bring it all together. Right? So this again, like this exact example also holds true for a lot of organizations, right? Because they're relying on the fruits of labor of people from around the world who are building and continue to build and maintain absolute best pieces of software that are solving specific problems to the best of their abilities. And the way that countries should also see some of these things again is, so what are the things that differentiate countries, right? So for example, one of the things that Takshashila has talked about in the tech policy course is, hey, look, there's a demographic difference that exists between India and other countries. There's a certain geographic benefit or advantage or disadvantage that we have in terms of we have a large coastline, we have certain resources which are abundantly available in India versus not abundantly available in India, right? So those are the things that the government should be more focused on in terms of how am I best able to take advantage of all of these things, right? Because again, for example, people talk about how is India taking advantage of the demographic dividend that we have. We have a lot of young people who are coming into the workforce, etc., etc. The Indian government shouldn't care about, am I creating my own software to be able to build web applications? Am I creating my own software to be able to I don't know, databases? Am I paying somebody to create a closed source database for me and then give it to me for usage?
Right.
That isn't exactly the best use of our effort. And again, we will unnecessarily be duplicating effort with somebody else has spent time to build a commons resource on, right? And this also is now where we end up getting into both into the political nature of software, right? Because we might not be happy with the way that open source project is being governed. We might not be happy with the direction that open source project is taking because we don't have a direct influence over it. We might have a certain amount of distrust on the people who are creating that project because it's coming from a certain country of origin, or it's not coming from a certain country of origin, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, the good thing still is, if it's all open source software, doesn't matter who you are or where you are in the world, you will still be able to validate the entire thing and ensure that it is fit for purpose, right? That you're able to use it without any security implications for you as a nation state, which is what the big concern for you is. Right. I don't know if I fully answered your question or not.
No, fair enough. It makes sense. It makes sense that how countries interact and how the open sources will then end up interacting with each other. Because what I heard from you with the example of Zerodha was you have solved the problems, but in 5 different places. You bring the jigsaw puzzle together and then solve a bigger problem with that. You don't have to go solve everything on your own, is what I understood, which is a fair point.
Yes.
So can you give me some global or Indian examples where we understand where open tools have enabled rapid bottom-up innovation that wouldn't have happened in the closed environment? Any larger projects or a small project that actually solved the problem using open sources.
So a lot of open source software has come out of bottom up work. So for example, one of the most popular and more recognized name right now is something called Kubernetes. Kubernetes is something that I still don't fully understand, but Kubernetes was a software that, if I'm not wrong, Google created to be able to solve some of their specific problems. And they decided to make it publicly available for other people, open source it. And the problems that they were solving were generic enough, and enough other organizations also had similar problems that they decided, no, you know what, we'll also come together and use it. And we'll also now like build this ecosystem out together.
Okay.
And Kubernetes is now like a global ecosystem of users and contributors and organizations which are relying on it, and organizations which continue to improve it.
Okay.
A very popular database is Postgres. And Postgres, again, like is something, if I'm not wrong, that came out of an academic lab where they were trying to build out a new database which was cutting edge at that point in time. And the database solved meaningful enough problems that professionals from around the world and even academics continued working on it and contributing to it and improving it to ensure that it again like stays relevant and it's continuing to solve meaningful real world problems.
Right.
One great large scale example is this project called Balmny. So it's a electronic health records EHR software, and it's also works well with the ERP software that hospitals more often than not use. In general, it's supposed to handle the life cycle of a patient who's coming into a hostel.
So like from the insurance perspective?
No, from the hospital's perspective.
From the hospital's perspective, right? Like the whole profiling of it, of the vitals and the medical condition and everything.
So get you registered, have a profile of yours, know all the things that you paid for, have all the reports of yours in a single place, be able to give doctors easy access to all this information. And the story for that project is absolutely beautiful. It's something that came out of ThoughtWorks in India, where they went to this very rural hospital. I don't even remember the name of the hospital now, but they were building software to solve the problems of that specific hospital, where they would have multi-day waiting times for patients, and they had multiple rooms of papers stacked up from the floor to the ceiling, patient files, and every time a patient comes back, you have to be able to dig through all of those things, and it'll take you multiple hours to be able to like pull those physical papers out, right, the files out. And they started out in that way by building out a software which is like useful for that. And now Balmny is something that is used in multiple different countries, and if I'm not wrong, either Bangladesh or Nepal decided to deploy Balmny across the entire country for all of their public hospital infrastructure, right? So it isn't even domain specific is like what I wanted to convey. Like it's not only in, let's say, a software domain or an e-commerce domain that you come across open source software that has an impact. Like practically every domain that you can think of, there is open source software that has had a significant impact in that domain that is available to be used in that domain. It's just a question of like people might not even know the fact that this open source project exists, which is why they might not be using it.
Absolutely. So you also mentioned something about Sci-Hub in India. Yeah. So what was it? I would want to like know more about it. What was it?
Yeah. So Sci-Hub was a very interesting case because my wife, she did a PhD, and I still remember that like every once in a while she'd just have like multiple tabs of Sci-Hub open because she had to look for papers which were just not available anywhere else. I was talking to another friend of mine who also pursued a PhD in physics, and she was talking about how faculty would just very openly like tell them, yeah, this is like where you go and look for papers. This Sci-Hub website is now active. That Sci-Hub website is not active, etc., etc. And when a case was filed by some of the journals or journal publishers that Sci-Hub should be banned in India, the Indian research community came together to put an official letter to the Supreme Court saying, again, please don't ban Sci-Hub because it's going to bring Indian scientific research to a halt.
Right.
And one of the fundamental things here is, so most of this research is coming out of academia, public institutes. Public institutes are paid through taxpayer funds. Even for people who are employed at private universities, a lot of the research that they're able to pursue is coming out of government ministries, MHRD, Ministry of Education, and so on, who's funding that work.
Yeah, all the data.
Right? So when public taxpayer money is being used to fund this work, why isn't the outcome or the output also in the public domain?
Right. Makes sense.
So,
yes.
so this is a fundamental push for open access in general, like open access research and open access knowledge, right? So why is it that these researchers who used government funds and taxpayer funds to be able to do a certain research, who are then putting up that paper behind a paywall, and another researcher in another government-funded institute isn't able to read this paper and has to pay extra money?
It's just like a friction, a barrier that is created. Okay, makes sense.
And there again, like it just feels like absolutely unnecessary transaction costs being spent in a marketplace and unnecessary barriers being put in that marketplace, right?
Yeah. So far we have spoken about all the good sides of having open source tech software and even any of the fields. What could be the possible cons for this?
So the cons are not in terms of the software itself, but the cons are how we as a society are handling commons. There is like this thing which is again very popular in policy circles, which is the tragedy of the commons, right?
Yes.
So there are definitely differences between physical commons and digital commons, and a lot of the tragedies in physical commons don't directly translate to digital commons, but there definitely is a significant amount of concern over the tragedy of the digital commons in terms of, like, for example, with Wikimedia, there was this other case recently going on where they were talking about why a certain page was written in a certain way, and then questions about who are these people who are writing this information, like are they doing it because they have certain ulterior motives, etc., right? So there's always a question of the digital commons that we are building. Do we recognize the biases that we have, which we are introducing into the digital commons that we're building? Do we recognize the political biases that we have, that we are introducing into the digital commons that we are building? And how do we ensure that the digital commons serves everyone equitably instead of only focusing on serving a few select group of population and only solving the problem for that select group of population, right? How do we ensure that the digital commons is actually sustainable in terms of continuing to maintain itself, continuing to support people who are working on maintaining it, instead of having to rely on the to some extent tribal nature of people to want to contribute to a commons, but again that only goes so far because we live in a system where we have to make money.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So those are the larger problems with the free and open source ecosystem as a whole. The software itself, like any software, can be modified and updated and improved so that there are no software problems that exist. The problems exist at the ecosystem level. Like, for example, there's a significant amount of conversation and debate going on right now around the sustainability of the open source software.
Yes.
Right?
That's the crucial thing I also think of. Because even when I'm kind of trying to push back on this, that open source is great. There have been successful projects like Flow, like this movie won an Oscar, right? And even there are other successful projects. I can't really recollect right now. But still, the incentive seems a little less than what actually would be when you are paid highly to solve a problem. But having said that, like, we are humans, we have that tribe instincts in us still. We want to solve the problem. And of course, there can be people who want us to solve those problems and they can fund these projects. So coming to the cons that we spoke about, I think that is something that we can live with. Right?
So we're actually trying to work on improving it, in fact. So for example, again, one of the problems is how do we get companies to recognize what is their moat and what is a very simple cost center, right? So that way, if we are actually able to help companies understand some of those things, help them understand what parts of software is a very clear and pure cost center for them, or what is not a differentiator for them, then we are going to be able to have a meaningful conversation on, now tell us how much you're spending to either acquire some other software from other people, a vendor who's created it, or you're like writing all of that like completely internally all by yourself, right? So then we're actually able to put a dollar figure on some of these things. And if we're able to do that as an industry in terms of, let's talk about all the large players in the financial industry, how much they are all spending recreating code from scratch, all of them within their own silos. And if we're able to do that, right, and if the industry together is able to come together with a number of, here is how much we are collectively spending, then I'm able to have a much easier conversation about, or a much more fruitful conversation on, look at the amount of money that you're spending collectively. And let's now talk about how much of that percentage you're willing to contribute to an open source project collectively, so that this domain as a whole is able to rely on this, and this domain as a whole is able to fund this work.
Right.
That is the larger problem. Like, how can we bring organizations together, recognize these common building blocks, and contribute to it?
Right.
There are existing coalitions already and existing alliances. Like NASSCOM, for example, is a body of like organizations which have come together, right? Like, and they have common, in some cases, policy goals that they're pushing for, because they again have recognized the fact that all of them share a number of fundamental policies that they're reliant on, and it'll be great if those are like modified in a certain way and they're able to lobby for some of these things.
Right.
So in a very similar way, we need alliances and we need like domains and organizations within domain to form these sorts of alliances where they're able to come together, understand what are these building blocks that we are built on top of, how much are we spending recreating some of these things. And now let's have a conversation about how much of this are we willing to put to open source projects directly and contribute to them, so that we are not hiring all of these people. Instead, there's an open source project which is able to support all of these people.
So this is all a factor of networking or coming together in a same platform. So is this really happening in the current scenario, in the current scapes of technology?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah. So, for example, again, one of the most advanced examples is in the US with the Finos Alliance, right? It's the financial alliance in the US of organizations. There's also, for example, RISC-V. RISC-V is an instruction set architecture. It's an alternative to, let's say, the ARM chips in your mobile phones, or the Intel or AMD chips in your laptops. And RISC-V is an alliance of organizations which have come together and said, hey, look, like all of us want better chips, all of us want more power efficient chips, and all of us don't want to pay these specific organizations extra licensing cost every time we have to create a chip.
Okay.
Right? So all of us will come together, pool money to be able to pursue the fundamental research that will improve this RISC-V instruction set architecture as a whole. And all of us together are able to reap the benefits of it.
Right. Yeah.
Actually, I'll give you an even better example. Like, everybody is talking about generative AI now.
Yes.
Ignoring the models themselves, right? Everything underneath is built on top of open source.
Oh.
So, for example, PyTorch is a way to create and build and tune machine learning models. TensorFlow is a similar thing.
Yes.
If I'm not wrong, PyTorch came out of Meta, TensorFlow came out of Google. There are similar other things which have come out of other organizations or communities. And there's been a lot of cross-industry collaboration, cross-organization collaboration to build these things out.
Okay.
So these are not things that were only built by that specific organization, but the entire ML AI industry and multiple organizations in these industries came together to say, hey, yeah, you know what? That's a much better library to be able to build models. Why don't I also adopt it? But hey, you know what? You forgot this thing. So why don't I add this feature to it, and so on and so forth.
Understood.
Right?
Yeah.
So the whole Gen AI thing that we're like all hyped up about right now is built on top of this sort of collaboration.
Okay. So one final question I have here is, if government has to enable such ecosystems, what can they do? Because now all I heard from you is that these are private players vested in solving a problem. But if at all government is also interested in solving problems which are very niche to them as well, how can they enable systems like this in their own ecosystem? How can bureaucrats understand this? How can, the larger state government can come and be a part of this?
Perfect. Again, like, great question. I think, like, when asked this question, right, like, a lot of people might think that we need to come up with new policies or new regulations or new incentives or something of that sort. But the simplest answer that I have is, most state or nation state governments are the largest procurers of software within their like ecosystems, right?
Yes.
Like
I have worked in a couple of projects.
right? In huge procurers of like software and like across different domains, across different fields, etc.,
Yes.
etc. So the simple question is, can we modify software procurement within the government so that they're prioritizing open source software over closed source software?
Yes.
Right? And technically, this is already supposed to be true. Like we already have a policy at the union government that is supposed to mandate that all things being equal, you're supposed to pick an open source software over a closed source software. Right?
Okay.
It's just that we're not able to enforce that policy. And we're not able to hold the government accountable to ensure that that policy is being enforced. Like hold the government accountable to ensure that they are not picking a closed source software over an equivalent or better open source software.
Okay.
And government also has a policy already where it says if no existing thing exists that solves this specific problem, then the government can give money to a player to build that solution. But that solution can also be open source.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So solutions that are specifically built for the government can be released under like an open source license, can be released as part of the open source ecosystem.
Right. So like if central government builds something, it can be used by state governments.
Yes.
Like in federated architecture, we have divided rights and access to data.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Understood.
But again, like these are all already laws in India. It's just that because of the way that the procurement guidelines are set up, because of the politics of procurement in the government itself, a lot of the times when the tenders go out, the tenders are structured in such a way that even if there is a better open source alternative, the tender rules out that alternative and only goes with the closed source solution that exists. Because again, like there's a lot of politics involved in government procurement.
Right.
I think I'll just like end with something that isn't even something that I'm saying for the first time and has been said multiple times before by a lot of other people. Public money, public code.
Okay.
Right. The same thing with research as well. When it's public money, the research output should be open. It should be open access. And the same thing with software as well. Like public money being used to create new software for the government, whether that's the state or the union government, it has to be public code. You have to release that back under a public license.
Okay. Thank you, Rahul. That was very interesting. I could not think of any other way to put it. Like, this is a new topic for me, but it went very interestingly. Thank you, Rahul. Thank you, everyone, for listening to us. We'll meet you on the other side in another episode.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.